We are well within our quorum, so I will go ahead and call the meeting to order, and then we'll see if Chris joins, we'll manage the votes that way. But now if I can just find what I did with the agenda, that would be helpful. It was here a second ago. Okay. Welcome everyone to the October 9th meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee. I'm going to run through our agenda and then we will go ahead and get started. Tonight we will begin with our opportunity for public comment. We will look to approve the minutes from our last meeting. We will get an update on the single environmental impact report for MEPA and look to approve the submission of that report. We will review our 90% construction documentation schedule up through bidding, and then we will we'll establish a pre-qualification committee. And then we have some additional proprietary items to look at and discussion and approval of infiltrometer testing costs, allowing for some time at the end for miscellaneous project updates. So we'll start out with public comment. If any member of the public is here for public comment, I'd ask you to unmute and identify yourself. Though I am looking at our roster and it does not appear we have anyone. So we will, as always, leave open the opportunity. If someone does show up for public comment, we can revisit this, but we will go ahead and move on to approval of minutes for the September 24th 2024 meeting. So are there any comments or questions related to those minutes? Okay, hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve the minutes of September 24th, 2024.
John, Mike Shepherd, so moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so motion by Mike, second by Jagroot, and we will do this in a roll call vote since we are conducting a remote meeting. We'll start with Bill.
Yes.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
Chris Masters?
Yes.
Jagroot?
Yes.
Tiffany?
I need to abstain because I was not at the meeting.
And I will also abstain because I was not at the meeting, so it passes 4-0 with 2 abstentions. Okay, next on the list for our agenda is the MEPA submission. So Chris Kenny or Chris Eberly, am I turning this over to one of you?
Yeah, I can take this one. So we talked, I feel like we've talked at length about MEPA at this point. For those joining the ESBC for the first time, welcome. But essentially it's not much has changed in terms of what this report represents from our previous discussions on May 14th or our previous discussions on July 9th. MEPA is a law that's the Mass Environmental Protection Act. And when you hit certain triggers, you trigger a process that we're coming to the conclusion of, where you first would have an environmental notification form. And then you follow it up with an environmental impact report. We submitted our what's called the ENF earlier in the year and received a certificate that outlined what needed to be required in a single environmental impact report. So on Friday, we sent the committee the draft of the environmental impact report. It has it meets all the criteria that are necessary for our per the certificate we received after the ENF to ensure that we can move forward in the MEPA process and submit that to I think it's the environmental monitor on the 15th. And as part of that, we wanted to put the report before this committee and get a motion to endorse the report so that we can include that in the final draft that's submitted. We expect that the draft is complete and will be accepted by the MIPA office, at which point they'll issue a certificate, and the certificate would acknowledge that we are all clear in terms of completing the requirements of MIPA. Steps that would go on following that would be that we'd reach out to town council and they would draft a letter to the MSBA so that they would document in that letter that the town has completed the requirements of the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act. And by completing that step, it would open up the door for the town to enter into the project funding agreement with the MSBA, which is the step that follows the project scope and budget agreement, typically right after if you don't have MIPA certification required as part of your job. Recently, one job before us, they began introducing MIPA as a requirement for that project funding agreement. Once that's signed, that will reignite the reimbursement process. So the reimbursements for all of the costs expended that are reimbursable up till this point will at that point be forwarded to the MSBA along with some budget revision requests, which is some of the paperwork that they require as we transfer various things in the budget. And following a period of time that I won't go into an estimate here because it's a little unclear, they'll begin reimbursing the town once again for through the MSBA grant program, and that will continue until we get to the project funding agreement bid amendment, which will occur when we bid the project. So we're happy to take any questions that anyone has on the single EIR, or we would entertain a motion to endorse the single EIR as it was submitted.
Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve the submission of the single EIR. Or Chris, language-wise, would we need to authorize Vertex to?
No, I think this is just it's a statement by the committee that you've endorsed the single environmental impact report, and that it may be submitted to would it be the MIPA office, Dan? I don't know that the language is critical.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So Dan nodded at MIPA office. So we'll go with, I would seek a motion to endorse and approve the submission of the single environmental impact report for MIPA to the MIPA office.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think it's Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency.
Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency. Okay, so we have a motion by Mike. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Bill. We are roll call again. Bill?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
Chris Masters?
Yes.
Jagru? Wait, did we lose?
Yes.
Oh, there he is. People moved around in my window, so all of a sudden I lost Jagru for a second there. And Tiffany?
Yes.
And I am a yes. So it is unanimous and the submission is approved, which is a big milestone for us. This has been obviously going on for a while, and to take the next steps to open up the opportunity for the town to start realizing the reimbursement is obviously a significant point in the project. So thank you to everyone at Vertex, at Perkins Eastman, our various other partners, and the staff in the school district for making this happen. Next, we have the 90% CD schedule.
Sure. So I'm going to share the screen. I'll start my little PowerPoint slide that I put together for you. So I'll get you guys out of the way. So we're now at the 90% or the start of the 90% CDs phase. So we thought it made sense at this point in time to give you a general overview. Bear with me for a moment. I was working on another job where translation was important. And let me turn off my closed captioning. If you just bear with me for a sec. I don't have any music to play in the background as I have technical difficulties. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. So we thought at this point it was appropriate to do just a general overview of where we are today and what remains as we begin to march towards breaking ground on construction, which is a process that we've all been in for several years now at this point. The 90% CDs phase will be the phase that we ultimately end up with the almost bid docs that are mostly complete, substantially complete in the sense that they show all of the scope so that we can get an accurate estimate from the estimators at the end of January. We'll be submitting those to the estimators on January 5th, and we expect to have the estimate back on the 30th. At that point, we will complete the 90% submission to the MSBA, which is a quick turnaround. And that submission will be reviewed from February 5th until February 26th, ultimately leading us to a bid date on March 13th with filed subbidders, which are the 22 trades that, it's 18 trades that are required by mass law to be bid separately. And then the GCs will take the bid results of those filed subbidders and deliver their GC bids on or about April 25th. And then in May, we'll award construction and begin the process of actually starting construction. In anticipation of that, the next one of the next big milestones is a requirement by the MSBA that the project have a mass code structural peer review. And so currently we're in the process of procuring proposals from 3 firms, one of them being our Vertex structural wing, as well as 2 other firms. And we expect by the time we meet again to have those proposals to put in front of you. We've set up a schedule with Perkins that will allow a structural review set to come out in mid-December. And then when we have the comments back from that peer review, we'll have that back checked by the structural engineer so that we can incorporate any, or we'll have that incorporated by the structural engineer. We'll incorporate any of the comments into the estimate, and then we'll have the reviewer back check that set. So we'll bring you 3 proposals and the committee can choose one, hopefully at the next meeting. Also, we'll be beginning the process of pre-qualification, and I'll get into what that is in a second. But the other significant step that still remains is the street improvement design. So last night, in subsequent nights, we got Monday, the planning board voted to approve the project and allow us to move forward and granted us our stormwater permit. So that'll be finalized in the next week. And then last night, the Concom also granted us approval on the project site. So the next step will be to begin the process of coordinating with DPW, the select board, town engineer, and others in the improvements that will be going on within the right-of-way on 85 or Hayden Row. And as part of that, we expect over the next month, we'll have multiple meetings where we finalize the information to develop the design for that. That will also require a notice of intent. And that notice of intent will require us to go back before the Conservation Commission because there are wetlands to the north of Hayden Row that will be within the buffer zone of. So that'll be an additional step to go before the Concom again and get approval of the street improvements. And then ultimately we'll go before the select board and they'll vote to grant the traffic improvements within the right-of-way and the traffic light is what we anticipate. Following that, there's a brief period where we'll finalize the bid documents, and then those bid documents will go through one last round of comment with the DPW before we go out to bid roughly on the same timeline as the larger project. In discussions with the working group, we think it makes sense to separate the street improvements from the larger building project because in our experience, horizontal contractors are more efficient at horizontal roadway construction, whereas building contractors tend to have challenges when they try and take on horizontal roadway construction. So we're thinking that it would be let as a separate contract from the larger building project. At that point, through that 5-month process, we will determine what the right time for the utility pole and street improvement schedule will be. We've talked about a couple of different potential schedules, whether the utility poles move first or whether we try and hurry up and get the widening done and have the utility poles and traffic light follow. But we know that the traffic is still in the 9 to 12 month lead time to get the necessary equipment. And we know from our experience that the utility pole relocation, both from our professional experience and also the town's experience with the Main Street project, that utility poles can take some time. So I think we want to have more discussion about what that schedule actually becomes. So it's sort of still in the to be determined, but we expect to ferret that out as part of the overall town coordination and select board review process over the next few months. So that's the big picture schedule. We are working with Perkins Eastman to develop a work plan with the major milestones we want to hit for the 90% CD phase. But if there's any questions about schedule, we can talk about those. Otherwise, I'll move into pre-qualification.
So any questions on the schedule? No. Just one question. When you said you'll be sending the items out to cost estimators again, is the same process as we've had before, where it'll go to two different estimators?
Correct. We do two separate reconciled estimates. It'll be the same estimators as we had last time for all of our previous cost estimates. So they'll be familiar with the project. They'll look at it independently and we'll reconcile them at a number that will determine the final filed sub-bidders that we need to use. I don't think any of them are close at this time, but and it will also be the final check set for the MSBA. And then after we go to bid, we'll file the permit or the final drawings that are bid with all the addendas with the MSBA. And that begins the kickoff of the PFA bid amendment stage on the MSBA side.
Okay.
So moving on, we also wanted to talk to you this evening about pre-qualification. And what pre-qualification is it's a process that's established in Chapter 149, which is the design, bid, build procurement that we're using. And it allows you to select the contractors and subcontractors within certain limitations who are capable of bidding on your job. It's a required process if you're over 10 million, as we are for our estimated construction cost. And the subcontractors that you're allowed to choose have to fall under one of the 18 classes of work where their work is over $25,000. If those 18 classes of work, and a lot of those are the ones that you're familiar with, like electrical, HVAC, plumbing, fire protection, as well as some others that are defined in the law, will each be allowed to bid openly on the project. Other trades, such as drywall, concrete, and structural steel, those are and site work are chosen by the general contractors. But as part of this, we'll also pre-qualify the general contractors as well. The pre-qualification is a multi-stage process. And what it is we'll develop a request for qualifications. We'll publicly advertise that. And from that, we'll get statements of qualifications from people interested in bidding the work. We'll establish a committee that will decide what the scoring is for that. And that committee will review and make a recommendation back to the ESBC, likely in February, about who should be pre-qualified for the project. At that point, only those who are successfully pre-qualified will be allowed to bid on the project, both in the filed sub-bid phase and the follow-up GC phase. The way the statement of qualifications is developed is according to a maximum minimum scoring system that DCAM has established, and the pre-qualification committee gets to decide what the actual scoring system will be as part of the RFQ that we put out. So within that, we've developed a fairly time-tested system that really looks strongly at heavily weighting similar project experience, heavily weighting project references, and making sure that everyone who's bidding on the project has the experience necessary to do a project of this scope and budget. Ultimately, that point distribution is decided by the committee. And so we're not told by the state that we have to use a specific scoring system. We're told by the state the categories we need to consider and how we need to weigh, and we're allowed to decide how heavily to weigh the various aspects that you see on the screen here. Ultimately, the state has established that 70 is the minimum points that they must receive. So we'll want to develop a statement of qualification scoring system that will allow only the qualified contractors to hit that minimum 70 points. So on the screen here, it's a little bit small, but you can see the general overview schedule of how we approach pre-qualification. We find that for projects such as this, it's best to establish a subcommittee that will be responsible for developing the request for qualifications and evaluating the statements of qualifications that come back in. I'll just go through some of the milestone dates. We're thinking that the pre-qualification kickoff is really going to be in mid-November, and we'll get them back from, we'll advertise just after the Thanksgiving break. We'll give them about 3 weeks to come back with their submission, and then we'll parse through those submissions through the course of several meetings in January and February, ultimately arriving at the recommendation of who to qualify and who not to qualify. We'll seek your approval at the end of February, and that'll give them 2 weeks to know that the bids are coming. When those bids hit the street, only pre-qualified bids need to be considered. And we'll then follow up with the bidding process that'll have those filed subcontractors that are identified, giving their results on 4/11. And then the general contractor chooses from the filed subcontractors that submit bids, including filed subcontractors have the ability to exclude themselves from other bidders. And they'll pick the bids that they feel gives them the best chance to move forward with the project. And ultimately we'll award in May. In discussion with the working group, we discussed a proposed roster for the pre-qualification subcommittee. We used a similar approach for the Hopkins project when we went through that recently. And it does require that you need a minimum of 3 members, and 1 member must be from the OPM, the designer, and the owner. So we had proposed to have 2 voting members from Perkins Eastman, so it'd be Dan Colley and Jessica Vavrishek. From the OPM, it would be myself and Chris Kenny. And from the owner, the working group proposed Susan Rothermich, Tim Person, and Mike Shepard. Susan and Tim both went through the Hopkins process with us, so they're familiar with how we do this. And we know Mike has extensive experience with contractors through his lifetime of construction monitoring. So we thought he would be a good person to add to the team. Ultimately, this committee will advertise their meetings, and so we'd be discussing it most likely in publicly advertised virtual meetings, where we will ultimately bring the recommendation of that subcommittee back to the committee. So with that, I would entertain any questions, and if there aren't any questions, we would be requesting a motion to establish the pre-qualification subcommittee with the members listed on the screen.
So before, in and amongst the questions, I know we discussed this at the working group, but just to confirm, Susan, Tim, and Mike, if you're all willing and eager to serve on the pre-qualification committee.
Always willing and eager, John.
Yeah, that's fine, John.
Yep, Mike's happy to help, John.
Okay. Any questions then from the committee about this process or the subcommittee?
I have a question, John, about the contractors. Do they have to meet any specific requirements? I saw the word qualified contractors. Are there any, do they have to be approved by MSBA, or is there any special requirements?
So there's certain mandatory requirements. One is bonding capacity. So they have to have bonding capacity to enter into construction that meets the level of estimated construction costs. So in the neighborhood of 125 million for the general contractors. And then it would be based on the estimated construction cost that comes out of the 60% estimate. So within the estimate that we did as part of 60% CDs, we identified the value of each one of the trade contractors that was over 25,000, and we would include that in the request for qualifications, and they would need to demonstrate that bonding capacity. They would need to be DCAM certified in the trade that they're pursuing. So either DCAM certified as a general contractor or DCAM certified for the category of work that they're proposing on. And they would need to include their DCAM update statement, which is all of the work that they've done as part of all the public work that they've done since the last time that they were DCAM certified. In addition to that, the committee is able to set certain point milestones based on their management personnel, the similar projects that they've worked on. We're able to define what we think a similar project is, their terminations, their legal proceedings. They'll submit all that information, and then we'll score them against a criteria that we have. And that's the scoring is really what drives the pre-qualification process. If we can't get references, we find that if someone can't get someone to call you back as a reference, that's sometimes a sign that they wouldn't want to work with them again. So if we can't get enough references to say that they're a responsible contractor, that is can affect the scoring. We also try to build into the points that they are financially sound and other things like that with the capacity to complete projects. And it's not a perfect system. To be perfectly honest, there are ways that we see folks overload information to try and demonstrate that they're capable of doing it. But what it really is to weed out the people who aren't capable or have not done anything similar to the project being considered, so that you don't end up with a contractor doing a $125 million job for the first time.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. If there are none, I would seek a motion to establish the pre-qualification committee with the roster previously shared by Chris Eberly and up on the screen right now.
So moved.
Motion by Bill. Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Jag Root. Roll call vote. Bill?
Yes.
Mike? You're on mute. Mike, you're on mute. No, still.
All
There
right,
we go.
John, I finally got it. Yes.
Okay. Chris Masters?
Yes.
Jag Root?
Yes.
Tiffany?
Yes.
And I am a yes, so it is unanimous and the pre-qualification committee is established. Next on the list is additional proprietary items.
So we were back with you in April of 2024, where we discussed several proprietary items that the school already uses certain vendors for things that they do. Since that time, we've advanced the design a little further, and the IT department has come back to us with additional items that are standardized within the district. So this includes their PoE switches, their data management system, their access control system, their video management cameras, and their AI video intercom system. As we've discussed previously, the state open bidding laws do allow for proprietary items if it can be shown that it's reasonably within the interest of the awarding authority to provide for those proprietary items. And in the case of many of these data or security items, there is good interest in why you would want to standardize those across multiple campus buildings that are all owned by the town or the school department. So we would be seeking a motion tonight to approve the 5 additional items, in addition to the previously approved proprietary items.
And these all came directly from the district.
Correct.
Any questions about these proprietary items? Okay, hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve the 5 additional proprietary items provided in the agenda materials.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Motion by Mike, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Tiffany, and we're roll call. Bill,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes, sir.
Chris Masters,
Yes.
Jagroot,
Yes.
Tiffany,
Yes.
and I am a yes. So approved unanimously, and we are moving
We're just moving
efficiently
right
through
through
our
it.
agenda. So yeah, infiltrometer testing costs.
Okay. Let me pull up my, I won't throw this on, bore you with the proposal that's in your meeting packet on screen. But as part of the Concom and Planning Board process, one of the conditions that they asked for was additional testing be performed on site at the additional testing be performed on site as part of the approval process. So we need to do additional test pits and do a specific kind of test called an infiltrometer test that studies how quickly water percolates into the soil. The civil engineer to move the process along used an extremely conservative number in order to justify this, but seeing what they thought was a reasonable number versus the really conservative number, the peer reviewer flagged it and said, well, we should test this because you're way more conservative than I think you should be. And so they've asked us as a condition of their approval last night to perform this testing. There's 2 components to this. I was able to get the first component to all of you in the meeting packet, which is Samiote's fee for the testing, which is $5,250. That would have a 10% markup to Perkins Eastman by contract. And then in addition to that, they need an excavator to go out there and dig the holes and assist in moving the testing equipment around. We reached out to Bill Diana, who has previously performed that service for us at the for this project, and he gave me a proposal that I just got in a few hours ago for $1,720. So that would have a 10% markup to us, as we've been doing that through our contract, and that would give it a total cost of $7,667.
Any questions about that?
Yeah, just for clarification, Chris, could you repeat maybe what features this affects? What design is it? The stormwater features?
It's the stormwater infiltration system. So the peer reviewer, they used a very conservative, I think percolation rate is the right word, in terms of their design for the stormwater infiltration system. And so this is to verify what the actual infiltration rate is at those locations against their designed rate, to ensure that we won't have a problem with too much stormwater retention with the sizing and design of the stormwater features. The Samiotes explained that to the planning board members and the conservation commissioners, and they were okay with this being something that occurred prior to the start of construction, but they did insist that we do the testing.
Okay. So if the results turn out to be favorable, how does that affect the design?
It wouldn't make it worse, would be the biggest impact. We likely could, depending on how favorable they were, try and do a project change for the approved design based on the fact that if we could demonstrate that there was significantly less infiltration, other stormwater features that were necessary once this test was done. But I can tell you that it's much more of a drought now, which will be part of our next project updates items. So we'd want to make sure that it made sense to go back if we chose to do that, if we got really good results.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is we know this site is really wet. And we have said many times that we are going to do everything we can to make sure no water leaves the site. So I don't think, even if we got great results, I don't know if we would be willing to change it. Because I think we're kind of going down this road where there's already neighbors who are concerned. There's issues with the water that they think are coming off other, for Marathon. So I don't know if this is going to change the design at all. I think it's just belt and suspenders.
Yeah, at this point, we're not anticipating a change. This is just a verification that our rates are not exceeded.
Okay. I believe you had mentioned the groundwater is already quite shallow, right? It's like
Yes,
Yeah.
in some places the groundwater was quite shallow. I think it's a little bit better at the moment, but we're in a bit of a dry spell.
Yeah.
It's definitely better because the drill rig is out there putting in the well.
You're stealing my thunder. That's my next thing.
Sorry.
Other questions related to the infiltrometer? I'm sorry, Jag, are you all set?
No,
with that?
I'm all set. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. Then if there are no other questions, I would seek a motion to approve the costs for the infiltrometer testing required by the Conservation Commission.
So moved.
Second,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Motion by Bill, second by Mike. Roll call vote. Bill?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
Chris Masters?
Yes.
Jaggerut?
Yes.
Tiffany?
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so that is unanimous. And last item on the agenda is miscellaneous project updates, which Dan already previewed, but the only thing I think we've been talking about longer than MIPA has a development.
Yes, I'll jump that one ahead. So with convenient timing and some of the observations we made on our site walk, we were able to mobilize for the geothermal test well yesterday. We reached out after we had done the successful permitting walks in the woods and seen that the ground had stabilized a lot. We reached back out to Bill Diana, who had funding left over from the original authorization back in, would have been a year ago, to clear the road. And so he went in and removed the vegetation, flattened out a few spots, and was able to provide a stable enough road that we were able to walk it with Skillings on Monday. Skillings is also, who was contracted to do the test well, is also contracted to do the wells at Hopkins, and they happened to be demobilizing at about the time that this all developed. So we were able to get Bill in on a Saturday, have him clear the path in the woods, and we successfully walked it on Monday so that we were able to start doing the test well as part of that. So we'll get that data back. We'll have an understanding of a better understanding of the risks of the geothermal wells. And we think that that well should complete this week, barring any issues.
Okay.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, so the implications of that are the test well will then give us the results, and will it impact design?
It could reduce the number of wells potentially.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah, assuming it is better than what the results we're getting at Hopkins, it could reduce the number of wells. We still have a bit of a contingency in the number of wells that are out there. So this will help inform that. The other development there is that Bill's original proposal to do the road prep was $9,250, and when we stopped it in the winter, he had only incurred 5,800. So with this additional, there's still $1,250 remaining in his overall, in what he had originally proposed to do this work. So it actually came in under budget despite all of this delay. So that's another positive.
Always like under budget.
So one of the other items that we wanted to touch on through the chair's authority, we moved forward with a hazmat survey of 147 Hayden Row. That structure needs to be demolished, and one of the requirements, both of the MEPA project and or the MEPA SEIR and just the mass laws regarding demoing the structure, is that we would need to deal with the hazardous materials if they were present. We did find some hazardous materials in all the typical places that folks see them: adhesives, floor tiles, a few other places. And so we got the results of that survey back. That does require that we authorize some additional services to Perkins Eastman for hazmat design services. So Dan was able to give us a proposal of, it's $1,500 direct costs for the design services, and then a $4,000 allowance for construction monitoring. So with markup, that comes to $6,050. I wasn't able to get that on the agenda or in the meeting packet. So my thought was to work with John through the chair's authority to get that approved, but I did include that in the meeting packet. It just wasn't on the agenda. So that proposal is available to you. Assuming that's approved, there'll likely be a amendment coming to Perkins that would have the cost of the earlier approved infiltrometer testing, as well as the additional hazmat design services that'll be necessary to complete the design documents. Any questions on that? You guys are letting me move through this real fast.
Hey, Chris, I have a quick question. Would that additional $6,000, would that come out of a contingency bucket, or is that just included in what was expected?
We do have a contingency line item for additional design services through Dan's contract. So we would likely do it through that. We tend to, rather than bake that into Dan's number, it's a separate bucket within the budget that we bill out of as we commit that work.
Yeah, because we had no idea, Bill, that there was anything in that house. So there was no reason to have any
included
for them to include any fee for it until we found it. So
No, I understand. I was just curious if that's something that we would hit the contingency bucket for. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not a large amount, but and we've got plenty in contingency. I'm just wondering, probably the expediency is just to go ahead with it, but like, is this a project cost, or is there a town cost component to this too? Because the town acquired the house and it would need to be demolished. I mean, this would need to be dealt with at some point anyway. They probably weren't just going to leave it there rotting.
I tend to leave those decisions to the town itself as to whether or not it's going to be part of the construction project, most likely, unless you want to contract it separately. Someone would need to contract it separately if you were going to abate before demolition. If we build it into the number, then it's a drop in the bucket of a $124 million project.
Yeah.
And so certainly you have that option. But I always leave those decisions to the folks in town and how they'd like to pursue them.
yeah, the easiest way to do it is just to have us do it.
Okay.
It's small.
It's
All right.
categorically ineligible. The
Yes.
MSBA does not
Yes.
participate in demolition costs.
Correct.
So
Or
there's no
asbestos.
reimbursement tied to it.
Correct. But it's not a lot of asbestos. It's just some tile in a couple of rooms and adhesives, as Chris mentioned. There's not a ton of it.
Yeah, we didn't see that it was going to drastically change the budget when we thought about it.
No.
make sure I'm not skipping over anything. So I mentioned earlier, we did receive approval at both the planning board and Concom. So that's certainly a good milestone. As part of the sort of finishing that out for those who didn't view the meetings, we came up with a performance-based construction management plan and phasing plan that will include with the contractor. We thought that that struck the balance between the concerns raised by the Conservation Commission that someone would just come in there and clear willy-nilly versus the desire on the design team and Vertex team side to give the contractor flexibility in how they approach the project to deliver the best value. We also agreed that we would not oppose a channelized intersection at 147. That would be an intersection with raised curbs that would help prevent folks from turning left in addition to just having a sign. So we just wanted to update the committee on both of those in case you weren't aware of the changes. We met with the new building commissioner.
Hang on, Chris, can we just pause there and just make sure, because there were some changes as a result of that. So I want to make sure that nobody has any questions or concerns for that, especially as it relates to the road design.
I don't I don't know if they changed. They kind of punted that back.
They did.
They didn't add that. They kind of said, no, we're not. The town has to decide. So they didn't. We said we're okay with it, and they said we don't want to put that in there. So I think they deleted. So
we said we were okay with it being a special
okay.
condition, and they said they didn't want to make it a special condition.
In charge of that. So I think, John, that the next time that'll come up will be when when that thing's going through its permitting.
Okay. All right.
So
we'll put
probably
a hold
a
on
non-issue now because
okay,
it's not write-ups.
Okay, but that'll be a discussion point as we go through the permitting for the road work. Yep. Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Any other questions about the permitting process? So last Thursday morning, Mike Shepard, the design team, and myself met with Chris McWhite, who is the new building commissioner, head of special inspections, or I don't remember his exact title. Very nice, affable guy. We reviewed the project. We talked about the various aspects of it, familiarized him with it. No major concerns jumped out from that discussion. We agreed we'd go back and see him and Tom Poirier with the fire department when we finished the 90% for another check-in. The one thing that did come out of that was that we've had an ongoing discussion with them about how to answer some of the outstanding code questions that still remain, given that the town's reliant on third-party code review in order to determine a lot of those answers. And so they were okay with us reaching out to those code reviewers now, as opposed to waiting until the building permit application and having them include some consulting as part of the proposal that they give us, so that we could get answers on those questions now and incorporate it into the documents, which I think is helpful, both from the perspective of having the building officials know a third party has reviewed the solution, and from the project's standpoint, making sure that the answers to those code questions are incorporated into the bid documents and not a change order later. So I think that's positive development. We'll begin working to solicit those proposals and bring them to you at a future meeting so that we can get that process started. I did want to touch on one issue regarding a letter that we included in the meeting packet. Following the drawing review, we found that there was some issues that we wished were better addressed with both the plumbing scope and the FP scope, which is both done by one of the sub-consultants to Perkins. We included our letter in your meeting packet, and you're welcome to read it. We worked with the Perkins team to come up with a plan to address that, and so we'll be getting a check set in a couple of weeks, and we'll certainly update the committee on any developments related to that. I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but we thought the committee should be aware that that had occurred.
I let the consultant know everyone's concerns, and they acknowledged the concern.
Any questions related to that letter or issue?
John,
Yes.
just a statement. This is what owners, project managers do. They're protecting our interests, and I'm happy with the letter, and I'm glad they're on top of this.
And so that is the, just make sure I didn't miss anything on my scribbles here. So the last thing that I just wanted to talk about was the next ESBC meeting. So we were a few days, I think we approved it late this afternoon and it'll come out tomorrow for our invoice package for September. So we would like to meet again in October, probably around October 29th. The agenda that we see right now for that ESBC meeting will be to approve the invoices, approve the minutes from today's meeting. We hope to have the structural peer review proposals for the ESBC to consider at that time. With luck, if they can be available. It's taking a little longer than we thought it would. The third-party code proposals, we'll try and bring those, if not that meeting, the following meeting. We should have an update on the progress of the street improvements if we can get the meeting set up with the town officials. And around that time, we're hopeful to have some of the 60% comments that were included in the CD, the 60% CD set addressed. And we also should have the comments from the Perkins reviewer of the plumbing drawings so that those will also be available. And with that, unless there were any other questions, that was all that we had for you tonight.
Okay. Any other questions or issues from the committee that you want to raise? Okay. If there are none, then I would seek a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Motion by Chris, second by Mike. Roll call vote. Bill?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
Chris?
Yes.
Jagroot?
Yes.
And Tiffany?
Yes.
And I am a yes, so we are adjourned at 6:53. Thank you as always to HCAM. Thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you at the next ESBC meeting. Have a good night.